This is African American History is American History. Welcome. I'm your host, Harlan Kearsley. This program's goal is to foster understanding, promote discussion, and expand knowledge through stories of historical events, bios of unsung heroes, as well as timely and relevant news stories which hopefully will paint a vivid picture of the effects of segregation, discrimination, and bigotry on the lives of both blacks and whites. In 1863, from July 13th through the 16th, in Lower Manhattan, the New York City Draft Riots took place. In addition to a staggering death toll, the riots had caused millions of dollars in property damage and made some 3,000 of the city's black residents homeless. Worse even than the 1967 Detroit Riots and the 1992 Los Angeles Riots, the New York City Draft Riots remains the largest, deadliest, and most racially charged urban disturbance in American history. The New York City Draft Riots began after white working-class men became enraged with new laws passed by Congress that year to draft men to fight in the ongoing Civil War. What began initially as a lawful protest intended to express anger at being drafted to fight for free slaves quickly turned into a full-blown race riot. White rioters began attacking innocent black people, and the violence spread throughout the city. The death toll was estimated at well over 1,000. This is African American History is American History.
It's important to point out that the entire state of New York's economy was tied to the South. By 1822, nearly half of its exports were cotton shipments. In addition, upstate textile mills processed cotton in manufacturing. New York had such strong business connections to the South that on January 7, 1861, Mayor Fernando Wood, a Democrat with sympathies with the Confederate States of America, called on the city's Board of Aldermen to, quote, declare the city's independence from both Albany and Washington, end quote. Mayor Wood was a vocal critic of President Abraham Lincoln, as well as one of the main opponents of the 13th Amendment. That's the amendment which abolished slavery here in the United States. Mayor Wood pledged New York City's, quote, whole and united support, end quote, to the southern states. When the Union entered the war, New York City had many sympathizers with the South. During the 1840s and 1850s, journalists had published sensational accounts designed to stir up the white working class. They dramatized the, quote, evils of interracial socializing, relationships, and marriages. Daily newspapers consistently carried derogatory portrayals of black people and mocked their aspirations for equal rights in voting, education, and employment. More and more immigrants were arriving in New York City. Most were from Ireland and Germany. By 1860, nearly 25% of New York City's population was German-born, and many did not speak English. In March 1863, with the Civil War continuing, more troops were needed. Congress passed the Enrollment Act to establish a draft for the first time. In New York City and other locations, new citizens learned that they were expected to register for the draft to fight for their new country. Black men were excluded from the draft, as they were largely not considered citizens, and wealthier white men could simply pay for substitutes. On July 11, 1863, the first drawing of draft numbers in Manhattan occurred peaceably. However, when the second drawing was held at 10 a.m. on Monday, July 13, 1863, 10 days after the Union victory at Gettysburg, things quickly got out of hand. A furious crowd of around 500, led by the volunteer firemen of Engine Company 33, attacked the Assistant 9th District Provost Marshal's office at 3rd Avenue and 47th Street, where the draft was taking place. The crowd burst through the doors and set the building ablaze. When the fire department responded, rioters broke up their vehicles. Rioters cut telegraph lines. Others killed horses that were pulling streetcars and smashed the cars to prevent other parts of the city from being notified of the riot.
This is African American History is American History.
Since the New York State militia had been sent to assist Union troops in Gettysburg, the local New York Metropolitan Police Department was the only force on hand to try to suppress the riots. Police Superintendent John Kennedy arrived at the site on Monday to check on the situation. Although he was not in uniform, people in the mob recognized him and attacked him. Kennedy was left nearly unconscious, his face bruised and cut, his eye injured, his lips swollen, and his hand cut with a knife. He had been beaten to a mass of bruises and blood all over his body. Police drew their clubs and revolvers and charged the crowd, but were overpowered. The police were badly outnumbered and unable to put down the riots, but they did manage to keep the rioting out of lower Manhattan below Union Square. Over the course of 4 days, angry mobs of white New Yorkers roamed the streets of the city, from City Hall to past 40th Street, setting fire to buildings and killing innocent black people along the way. Abraham Franklin was one victim. This 23-year-old black man had hurried to his mother's house at 27th Street and 7th Avenue as soon as he heard the news of the downtown riot. The rioters swept uptown to 27th Street, crashing through the door of Abraham Franklin's mother's apartment. They beat him and hanged him, forcing his mother to watch. The mob was incensed. People testified of how the mob used pickaxes to break through doors, how they chopped through the water pipes so any people hiding in the basement of the buildings would be drowned, and how they threw a baby out of a window to its death. Close to 500 white people violently attacked the Colored Orphan Asylum, which first opened in 1836 and by 1863 had become a New York City institution. The orphanage, located on 5th Avenue between 42nd and 43rd Streets in Midtown Manhattan, housed an average of 400 children annually and was mostly managed by women. The mob cut down trees with axes and uprooted shrubs in what had been a carefully tended garden. When they were done, the mob burned the 4-story building to the ground.
Contrary to popular belief, in the most notorious neighborhood in New York, the 5 Points, a well-known center of interracial social life, not a single African American was lynched there. Historian Leslie Harris writes in her book, In the Shadow of Slavery, African Americans in New York City, 1626 to 1863. Quote, ironically, the 5 Points was relatively quiet during the riots. Mobs neither attacked the brothels nor killed black people within its borders. There were also instances of interracial cooperation when a mob threatened black drugstore owner Philip White in his store at the corner of Gold and Frankfurt Street. His Irish neighbors drove the mob away. And when rioters invaded Hart's Alley and became trapped at its dead end, the black and white residents of the alley together leaned out of their windows and poured hot starch on them, driving them from the neighborhood. End quote. In the 5 Points neighborhood, local priests
had formed a patrol to protect blacks. And of all the rioters arrested in the big uptown mobs, only one had been from the 5 Points. This is African American History is American History. A week after the riots, one of the most prestigious black newspapers of the time, the Christian Recorder, the official newspaper of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, estimated the deaths of people of color to be as high as 175. Historians, to this day, are still assessing the overall death, with recent estimates ranging as high as 1,200. Black people were driven from their homes and all of their property destroyed. In the aftermath, some 5,000 black New Yorkers were discovered hiding in police stations, in the swamps of New Jersey, and in barns on Long Island, desperately trying to find safety anywhere they could from the murderous white crowds. By 1865, the black population in New York City had plummeted to just under 10,000, its lowest since 1820. This horrific event, known as the New York City Draft Riots, must be remembered and never forgotten. They're part of not only New York City's history, but the history of America as a whole. Just as the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001, or the Capitol riots of January 6th, 2021, they are part of American history. This has been African American History is American History. The episode you've been listening to, the 1863 New York City Draft Riots, was written and directed by Harlan Kearsley. Thank you for listening. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe. Once you do, you'll be notified as soon as new episodes are posted. Thanks again, and please stay safe. African American History is American History. Copyright H.C. Kearsley, 2024.